thank all of you for coming for this very special occasion. We're especially grateful to Governor Cuomo that you're here. Also want to recognize, where did Cara go? Oh, there you are. Cara, please just stand up. Please stand up. This is Cara Cuomo. She's a junior here at the college, and we're delighted to have you here as the daughter representing the family. That's terrific. I also want to recognize Beth DeZords. There's Beth DeZords. She's a guardian angel for our center. She's been a wonderful friend for a great number of years. She knows Andrew Cuomo very, very well. I think we first hatched this notion at a dinner at your home a few months ago when the governor was there. And it's whatever Beth touches comes, just sort of comes to golden for us. And we're deeply appreciative. Good to see you again, Beth. If you had to make a list of the political figures who in this country, in office and out of office today, who've had the most impact on the lives of American citizens, especially a positive impact upon those who are less privileged, Andrew Cuomo would easily be in the top 5 of that list. I include that President of the United States and the others who served in that office. He has been governor of New York now for, you came in 2000, and this is the fifth year. He was born with DNA of public service in his blood. He followed that path. He worked after college and law school in New York. He worked for his father for 2 terms, where your father was governor. Some of us in this room were privileged enough to know Mario Cuomo, and he was a wonderful man, and we miss him still. Among his many other strengths, in addition to being such a good public leader, governor of New York, Mario Cuomo loved Lincoln. And one of the best books about Lincoln, it came out under his name on Lincoln Speeches. It was a really interesting, I remember he told me about it, and it was a terrific book. But Andrew went on from there in his own right, in his own way. Assistant U.S. Attorney in New York. He started then a nonprofit organization, HELP, and it was housing, essentially for housing for the less privileged, which was a very innovative group, and he guided the fortunes of HELP for several years. Eventually became attorney for the state of New York, which is a very prestigious job. Attorney General in a state often means aspiring governor. It's a shorthand for aspiring governor, the AG, and he indeed over time ran for governor. But I also neglected to mention his years in the Clinton administration, when he came in as assistant secretary at the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and then became the secretary. That's where I had an opportunity to work with him, and Maggie Williams, who was here just a few moments ago, who runs the IOP, worked very closely with Andrew at that time. But he was a superb secretary of HUD. Won various awards. I remember the innovation awards that came from Harvard while you were there doing that. And he really took it. HUD can be a fairly bureaucratic place. It was a bureaucratic place when he took the reins. He really cleaned it up. It became much more efficient. But he directed it toward housing again. It's been a preoccupation of his in his public life, as well as urban development. And it's now that post is now occupied by the former mayor of San Antonio, who's said to be on the short list for Mrs. Clinton should she win the nomination. Anyway, Andrew went on then to win the governorship of New York. He won by 62% when he won. He went on to win again a smashing victory here recently. Most of the big problems in the United States that come to Washington also come to his desk. He has to wrestle with some of the toughest issues. He's wrestling now with the aftermath of Paris, where we go with that. Our plan today is this was an opportunity for him to come and have a conversation, serious conversation, with students like you about the future of American political system, where we might go, how we might fix a lot of what's broken. And what he would really like to do is talk to us for a few minutes, and we'll have maybe he and I will sit down, have a couple of questions, and we're going to open this up for conversation. This is off the record, but you do have a copy of a prepared piece that will be published, and that will be the foundation for the comments. But what we really like to do is, he's done this once before, or a couple times with Harvard students some years ago, is to draw you out about where you think, and representing your generation, we really ought to be going, and how we can indeed make politics reach the kind of lofty aspirations that Andrew Cuomo represents. Thank you, Governor, for being here.
Well, thank you very much. First to David Gergen. You are really lucky to have one of the true professionals in this business. And this is a business of professionals. You know, you have politics and you have government. They're two different things. Some people master both. Some people master both to such an extent that they can actually work with people of different political parties. And I believe that's actually the highest form of government ability. David Gergen, literally, when they write the history books, he's going to be right there as one of the real experts and craftsmen of his generation. I love to watch him on CNN. Whatever he says, he's always smart. And he says it in a way that he sounds smart, doesn't he? When he speaks, he sounds authoritative. And your head just starts nodding as soon as he starts talking. So you're very lucky to have him. Beth DeZorts, who's on the Leadership Council, does a great job for Harvard. My daughter, who has been sufficiently embarrassed now that I'm sure I will pay for it later. But just to further provoke my daughter a little bit more, she's here with a friend of hers, Kyle Adams, who is in the middle of they've been friends for, how long have you been friends? A year? About a year. And he is now in a conversion process, going from the more conservative side of the political spectrum to the more progressive side. There's been halting movements as he's moved across the spectrum, but I haven't given up on him yet. I just want you to know. That's as nice as I get, Kyle. As David said, my main point is more to provoke you and hear from you. I spent time here. I ran for governor in 2002. David was very nice. He gave you the positive news on the bio. There was some less than positive news. I ran for governor. This is my second term. I previously had run for governor in 2002 when I was just coming out of the Clinton administration. And I lost that race. And I spent time here actually going back through what happened in that race. It was just past 9/11. The political sentiment was shifting 180 degrees. You could almost feel the body politic trying to figure out what 9/11 meant, and had different opinions going back and forth. So I spent time here trying to figure it out for myself and trying to talk to the leaders of tomorrow about what it means. Because this is a continuum, and you are stepping into the seats of leadership with a different skill set and a different orientation than just the generation before, certainly some archaic figures such as myself, who comes from a totally different situation. So a couple of points, but again, as David said, the conversation is what's most important to me. These are some of the most difficult political times I think that I have lived through. You feel it everywhere. They're not even political times. They're just unstable times for the country. And people will say different ways, but they're saying the same thing. There's an anxiety. These are interesting times. They're changing times. From one end to the other, you can be ill at ease because of the economic issues. You can be ill at ease because of the international issues, because of terrorism. But it is a period of instability for the country. And you see that all across the population. You also see at those times the extremes on both ends of the spectrum get larger and louder. When people have more pressure on them, and they feel more pressure and they feel more anxiety, you see the extremes grow and you see the extremes become louder. You're seeing that on the Democratic side and the Republican side in these presidential elections. People on the left, we're concerned about income inequality. It's growing. We're frustrated. No one's doing anything. I have an answer. Let's take the money from the rich person and hand it to the poor person, Bernie Sanders. This perfect solution. People on the right, nervous about their jobs, nervous about the competition, blue-collar workers nervous. We need an enemy. The enemy are the immigrants who are coming in and stealing everything from the good, hard-working Americans. How do we handle it? Make them leave. 11 million people out tomorrow. Donald Trump, nice and simple. And what do we do once we kick them out? We build a big wall so they can't walk back. Perfect. Nice, simple answer for people who are really afraid. But it's also a time, if we do it right, where we can have an intelligent conversation that really gets to issues. And that's what an election theoretically is supposed to be about, right? It's harder at a time like this when you have such emotion, because when people are thinking emotionally, they're not thinking logically. And when they get into their emotional space, until you slow them down and bring them down, you can't have a logical dialogue because it's not logical. But it's not impossible, and that's where we have to get to. But we have to start with the basics. First question in the last Republican presidential debate, I believe it was the last one, Fox News, was, first question, what do you believe about what Governor Cuomo did raising the minimum wage in New York? I had a proposal that day to raise the minimum wage to $15. Statewide, first state in the nation that would go to 15 statewide. And that was the question, first question to the Republican candidates. That shouldn't have been the first question. I have moderator envy. First question should have been, what is your vision for American society? How do you see American society growing and evolving? And then the respondents would have said, what does that mean? And the moderator would have said, well, you can have a concept of American society that is more individual-based, where the individual is primarily, if not exclusively, responsible for that individual's outcomes. It's up to you. If you're going to be a success or you're going to be a failure, it is up to you. And our society is based around the individual. Or you can say, I have a different vision of society, which is more of a collective and more of a cooperative with more sharing. And people help one another to succeed in more of a sharing relationship. Those are two very different visions. And by the way, they are both defensible visions. Well, how could one think the other? How could one think? They are both bona fide defensible visions. The individual model is in many ways the romantic American Wild West. You're on your horse, you have your gun, you're all set. You can take care of yourself, you need no one. The collective vehicle, different, evolving, but two very different views. The second question would then be, in your view of society, what is the role of the government? The individual-based would take you to a very limited view of government. National defense, because I can't do missiles, no matter how good I am. National defense, road, public safety, police, prisons. But that's it. Maybe education, basic education, but that's it. If you had said the cooperative view of society, you have a more expansive view of government. Medicaid, because we should help poor people with health care. Medicare, because we should help seniors with health care. Equality of public education, because everybody should have an equal choice. Tuition assistance for people who can't pay. It would be more extensive and more evolved. The moderator would then ask the person who said collective with the expansive government, do you believe the American people support that role for government? And now you would hear the crowd moan. Why? Because this is where we lose the audience. If we are believing in the collective form of society. Forget being a moderator, because I don't really have moderator envy anyway. I believe in the collective model. I do. I believe most people do, by the way. And I believe in the expansive view of government with expansive functions, because once you say a collective model, the vehicle to enact that is government. Because what is government? Government is not some alien being. Government is us. We agree, 50 people, we want to do something. Well, all 50 aren't going to go do it, so we're going to form a committee. And we're going to form one committee that's going to do roads, and one committee that's going to do bridges, and one committee that's going to do public safety, and that's government. We call it government. So government is us. And I believe that we, through government, can actually make this happen. But the audience is split at best. And people are very skeptical and cynical of government. How can that be? Now, it's not as much for your generation, because frankly, you haven't felt it as much. My generation has. Everything government went near seemed to be a failure. If you grew up in a city, you saw government come in, build public housing complexes that destroyed neighborhoods. And everybody had to move out to the suburbs to get away from the public housing complex. Physical projects, the big dig, whatever government goes to do, it gets slow, it gets expensive. It's just dysfunctional government. Bill Clinton ran for president, proclaiming that welfare, which was the mainstream anti-poverty program for 30 years, didn't work. Affirmative action didn't really work. We had to mend it, not end it. But government had a history of failures. And the conservative, the individual's best argument is impossibility. You can't do what you want to do because government is dysfunctional as an entity to actually make change. And that has been the status of the debate for 30 years. All my political life. That has basically been where the debate winds up. They don't say it that way. They don't start that high. But if you brought them through the logical decision tree of their political theories, that's where you would wind up. You would have a genuine individual-based society, person, genuinely arguing limited government, and genuinely saying to the audience, and there is no option. Because the collective view of government, the collective view of society depends on a functional government, which it has never demonstrated in 30 years. That is truly the essence of the political give and take. I've spent my entire life doing one thing: making government work. Even when I started a not-for-profit, it was a not-for-profit that handled the homeless problem in New York because the government wasn't handling it. And I thought we could do it better from a not-for-profit that could have more flexibility than government. But make the government work. Make it work. Why? For two reasons. Number one, people have a real desperate need for help today. You're talking about government in a nice academic setting, and it's theoretical, and it's in the abstract, and we can argue. I don't see government that way. I don't see it that way at all. I see it in the Chicago Housing Authority when I was HUD secretary, where there are blankets in the bathtubs because the mothers would have the children sleep in the bathtubs because it was the only place they were safe from the bullets, because the bullets would go right through the walls of the public housing complex. I see it in a girl in that Chicago Housing Authority, I'll never forget, 4 guys walking down a staircase. Before you walk down the staircase in Chicago Housing Authority, they give you special shoes with metal soles. Why? Because there are a lot of needles in the stairwells. And if you step on a needle and it goes through, that's hepatitis, it's HIV. So you're wearing these special shoes with metal soles, walking down the staircase from hell, the smells, the things that were left behind. We turn a corner, and here's a girl like 9 years old, looking out a window at one of the landings in the stairwells. The window was just bars with caked on dirt on the wall, and she's holding onto the bars, and she turns back and she looks at us. Now, this had to be the most odd sight you could see. It's 4 white men in suits coming down the stairwell of the Chicago, and she looked at us totally nonplussed with just dead eyes that said, I've seen it all, and nothing I'm going to see is going to faze me in life. You know, the government functions are very, very real. If you're homeless, tonight is your problem. Not a long-term policy that's going to take effect in the out years after there's this analytical study done by an academic university. Tonight is the problem. If you're making the minimum wage, you can't pay rent. Today is the problem. So there's an urgent need for government to work to solve the problems today. If you don't have a clean energy alternative, that clock is your enemy. Every time I hear the clock strike an hour, I say that's another hour where we were still burning fossil fuels, we still have traffic backups. That's how I see it. So make the government work to help people, number one. Number two, make the government work as a political argument to answer the cynicism in the main debate, which was you don't really have an option because the government is dysfunctional. You have to prove there is functionality in the government. And it can work, and it does work, and it is efficient. I believe if you prove that, you prove the efficiency and effectiveness of government, then it's a different discussion. Then it's a different paradigm. And then it is an argument that collective progressive government wins clearly for the first time in modern political history. When I was at HUD, I used to go to audiences and I would say, we made terrible mistakes in public housing. I would not defend those towers built tower after tower after tower after tower. We built public housing, really, we just built ghettos. I don't know what we were thinking. How could you put that high concentration of people in any one place and expect that it's not going to have a deteriorative effect on the community? So I would go in and say, we made a mistake. You know what my answer to public housing was? Blow it up. Take it down and do it right. The larger discussion of HUD was, I know you think that HUD was the monument to failed government, because HUD was a democratic, progressive institution. HUD was, we're going to help the poor people in the cities. The conservatives said, you can't. The Democrats said, we can. You watch us. We're going to form an agency called HUD. And we're going to build public housing. And we're going to build Section 8. And you're going to see we're going to turn around cities with urban development grants and model cities. And it was a disaster. And the conservatives said, oh, you're going to fix things like you did with HUD? So I spent 8 years trying to fix HUD and fix the product of HUD so we could say, yes, we made mistakes. We learned. Here is the new housing. We took down the public housing. We built Hope 6. It's scatter site. It's all throughout the community. It works. That's what we're doing in New York State. Not with the political argument in mind, with the argument of actually helping people, but that's what we're doing. They were talking about fixing a bridge in New York State called the Tappan Zee Bridge. Tappan Zee goes across the Hudson River from Westchester to Rockland. Tappan Zee, 20 years ago, the governor stood up and said, the Tappan Zee is falling down. And we have to replace the Tappan Zee Bridge. Except they never replaced the Tappan Zee Bridge. But they did effectively communicate that the Tappan Zee Bridge was falling down. Then, when you would drive over the Tappan Zee Bridge, and I have a thing with heights in general, so I'm not the best bridge traveler ever. You drive over the Tappan Zee Bridge, and they have these large metal plates in the middle of the roadway. But you could always see a little daylight between the plate and the roadway. And then the car ahead of you would go over the plate, and the plate would jostle just a little bit. And you would say, oh, this is it. This is me. I'm going to go over that plate. I'm going down, undo my seatbelt. Should I open my window? I'm going to swim. 20 years. I came in. I said, you know what? We're going to actually get it done. And we're going to get it done fast, and we're going to get it on time, and we're going to get it done on budget. Number one, because we have to have a new bridge before it falls down. But number two, because I want to show people that we can actually do it. Our main airport in Manhattan is LaGuardia Airport. Vice President Joe Biden landed at LaGuardia. Said, God bless the Vice President. He has a candor and a frankness that is refreshing. Slightly problematic, but refreshing nonetheless. He says, boy, if you landed at LaGuardia and you were blindfolded, you would think you landed in a third world nation. Not a really sensitive thing to say, but he was right. He was right. LaGuardia Airport is terrible. Terrible. It's like the King's Close. Everybody goes through this airport. It's terrible. Nobody said anything. Except it did say something for 20 years. It said whoever is running this airport has no idea what they're doing. And it was just another example of government dysfunction. We're going to redo LaGuardia Airport. We had gridlock in New York before Washington ever delivered gridlock. Washington thinks it happened in Washington first. It didn't happen in Washington. Gridlock was invented in New York State. And we had a New York style of gridlock, which was much meaner than the Washington gridlock. It was more of an ethnic, vindictive form of gridlock. And we went through about 40 years where the state legislature wouldn't pass budgets on time. Same problem they have in Washington. By the way, why is it always the budget that causes the gridlock? Because that's where the money is. Everything else is baloney. The budget has the money and the priorities. That's why they don't pass a budget. New York, they never passed a budget. We came in, we passed 5 budgets on time in New York State. Why? Because it was an indicator that we can get past this issue of gridlock. I have a Democratic Assembly, I have a Republican Senate. It was a perfect model of showing that bipartisan government could work, or not. And it hadn't worked up until then. With a bipartisan government, we got marriage equality passed, one of the first states in the nation. We passed it. It resonated all across the country. We raised the minimum wage. We passed the most progressive tax code New York has had, with a sliding scale of the rate, where the more money you make, the higher rate you pay. We basically had a flat tax in New York, that everybody paid the same rate regardless of income. We got all that done with a bipartisan Congress. How? Compromise. Compromise. Compromise is not a dirty word. Compromise is how this nation was founded. Founding fathers were not zealots. They were practical. Everything was a compromise. The Constitution was a compromise. The civil rights laws were compromises. Everything was a compromise because we came from 2 totally different places. Compromise, here's the riddle. Well, I'm a real progressive. I'm never going to compromise. I'm going to state the absolute and hold out for the absolute. Well, then you know what? You're going to lose, and you're going to damn the progressive movement, because you're not answering the first question, which is, can government actually be a vehicle for change? And if you are one of the actors in gridlock, then you are one of the condemners of the possibility of government. So the riddle is, if you are truly a progressive, you will compromise to achieve some change, which, by the way, is much better for the people who you're trying to help, but also advances your argument that government can actually work. So the true zealot is the compromiser in an apparent oxymoronic situation. Make the government work. Last point, I believe the upside is this. I believe people believe in the collective form of government and society. I've been in the room when Mario Cuomo convinced the nation at a Democratic convention that the collective form of society was a truer, better, healthier form of society. I've heard Ted Kennedy, apropos here today, give beautiful speeches that made people cry. And yes, they accept the collective view of society. Why? Because people are smart. And they know we're independent. They know that if you sneeze, I catch a cold. They know that if you're not educating young people and the workforce is being dumbed down, it's going to hurt them and hurt the competitiveness of this country. They're fair. They know that if there's a minimum wage and you can't afford to eat and pay the rent on a minimum wage, that's not right. They know that. There's a fairness. They have compassion. You walk past a homeless person on the street, a 3-year-old will turn around. Why? Because the 3-year-old says, this is not right that we leave somebody on the street. That person who's being forced to walk by and make believe they don't see anything and just look straight ahead, they know that they're feeling this is wrong. I'm not supposed to leave someone, a fellow human being, on the street. It violates my basic decency. And I'm leaving part of myself on that curb when I walk past that person. They just have to know that there's a vehicle that can actually do it and that can actually make a difference. And that's what we're trying to do in New York. First, to help the person who needs the help. Second, to give the possibility of hope. I believe when you prove the potential of government and you prove that is a viable option, that you're going to see a different day in politics and a different day in this nation. I believe effectiveness of government, possibility of change, plus the better angels of the American people, that is political dynamite. That is TNT. You will see an explosion in this country. We just have to answer the equation and answer the riddle. That's what New York is trying to do now. That's what New York has done historically. It was always the progressive capital of the nation. I'm sorry for you people who came from another state. New York was the progressive capital. The environmental movement started in New York. The women's movement started in New York. The civil rights movement started in New York. The workers' rights movement started in New York. And there is no better place to demonstrate the potential of progressive government than the state of New York. Thank you very much for having me. I am interested in your conversation.